The rain came down like bullets that night in 1858. Dr. Samuel Morrison pulled his coat tighter as his horse struggled through the muddy path. He was a traveling doctor, moving from town to town helping sick people. But tonight, he just needed a dry place to wait out this terrible storm. Lightning split the dark sky as he spotted the big house ahead. The Whitmore plantation sat on a hill, its windows glowing yellow in the darkness. Samuel had heard stories about this place, and none of them were good. But with water pouring from the sky like a waterfall, he had no choice. He rode up to the main house and knocked hard on the wooden door. After what felt like forever, a tall, thin man opened it. This was Jake Whitmore's overseer, a man with cold eyes and a mean face. "What do you want?" the overseer asked, blocking the doorway. "I'm Dr. Morrison. I need shelter from this storm. My horse can't go another mile in this weather." The overseer looked him up and down like he was deciding if Samuel was worth the trouble. Finally, he stepped aside. "You can stay in the barn. Don't go wandering around." Samuel nodded and led his tired horse toward the old wooden barn. Inside, it smelled of hay and animals. At least it was dry. He found an empty stall for his horse and started removing the wet saddle. That's when he heard it, a soft crying sound coming from somewhere in the darkness. Samuel stopped what he was doing and listened carefully. There it was again. Someone was definitely crying. He picked up his small oil lamp and walked toward the sound. In the far corner of the barn, behind some old wooden boxes, he found something that made his heart break. A young girl, maybe 16 years old, was sitting on the dirt floor. But Samuel could barely tell she was human at first. She was covered in mud from head to toe. Thick, dark mud caked her hair, her face, her clothes, everything. She looked like she had been living in a swamp for months. The girl looked up at him with scared eyes. She tried to move away, like a frightened animal. "It's okay," Samuel said softly, setting his lamp down carefully. "I'm a doctor. I won't hurt you." But the girl just stared at him, shaking. Her clothes were nothing but rags, torn and dirty beyond belief. Samuel had seen poor people before, but this was different. This girl looked like she had been forgotten by the world. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. The girl didn't answer. She just kept looking at him like she couldn't believe someone was actually talking to her, like she was a person. Samuel knew he had to help her. He had medical supplies in his bag, and this girl clearly needed care. But he also knew the overseer wouldn't like him helping a slave. He needed a good reason. He walked back to the main house and knocked again. The overseer opened the door, looking annoyed. "What now?" "There's a girl in your barn who looks very sick," Samuel said. "If she has something catching, it could spread to all your other workers. That would cost your boss a lot of money." The overseer's face changed. Money was something he understood. "You think she's got something bad? I need to examine her to be sure. But if I'm right, we need to act fast." "Fine, do what you need to do. But make it quick." Samuel hurried back to the barn with his medical bag. The girl was still in the same spot, still shaking. He knelt down a few feet away from her. "I'm going to help you get clean," he said in the kindest voice he could manage. "You don't have to be afraid." Very slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a clean cloth and a bottle of water. The girl watched every move he made, ready to run if needed. Samuel dipped the cloth in water and very gently reached toward her face. She pulled back at first, but when she saw he wasn't going to hurt her, she let him touch her cheek. As he began to wipe away the mud, something strange happened. The dirt came off, but underneath wasn't what Samuel expected to see. The skin beneath was much lighter than the thick mud had made it appear. He kept cleaning, being very gentle. With each wipe of the cloth, more mud came away, and with each wipe, Samuel became more confused about what he was seeing. The girl's face was taking shape now, and it wasn't the face he thought he would find. Her nose was different than he expected. Her cheekbones were higher. Even her hair, as he cleaned the mud from it, seemed to have a different texture. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The girl opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. It was like she had forgotten how to talk. Samuel continued cleaning her hands and arms. The mud was so thick it was like removing layers of old paint. But as he worked, he noticed something that made him stop. There were marks on her wrists. Very faint marks that looked like they came from wearing jewelry for a long time. Rich people wore jewelry. Slaves did not. He looked more carefully at her hands. These weren't the rough, worn hands of someone who had worked in fields all her life. Under all that mud, her hands were softer, like someone who had once lived a very different kind of life. Samuel's heart started beating faster. Something was very wrong here, but he couldn't figure out what. As he cleaned more mud from around her neck, he felt something hard underneath all the dirt. Very carefully, he wiped away the mud and found a small chain. Following the chain with his fingers, he discovered a small locket hidden beneath layers of grime. His hands shook as he cleaned the locket. When he finally got it clean enough to open, what he saw inside made him gasp. Inside was a tiny painted picture of a man and woman, both dressed in expensive clothes. The kind of clothes only wealthy people could afford. And in the corner of the locket were letters, initials that spelled out Amy A. Samuel looked at the girl again. Really looked at her. Now that her face was mostly clean, he could see her features clearly. And something about her face seemed familiar, like he had seen it somewhere before. Where had he seen those initials? Amy A. He thought hard, trying to remember. Then it hit him like lightning. 5 years ago, he had seen a notice posted in several towns, a missing person notice. A family from Charleston had been attacked by bandits while traveling. The parents and their servant had been found dead, but their daughter's body was never recovered. Everyone assumed she had died too, maybe dragged away by wild animals. The girl's name had been Margaret Elizabeth Ashford. Amy A. Samuel stared at the girl sitting in front of him. Could it really be possible? Could this mud-covered girl, living like an animal in a barn, really be the missing daughter of one of Charleston's richest families? But if she was Margaret Ashford, how did she end up here? How did a rich man's daughter become a slave on a plantation? As Samuel looked into her eyes, he saw something that convinced him he was right, even after years of horrible treatment. Even covered in mud and wearing rags, there was something in her eyes that spoke of a different life. A life of education, of comfort, of being loved and cared for. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the barn, Samuel had discovered something that would change everything. This wasn't just a sick slave girl who needed medical help. This was a free person who had somehow been stolen from her real life and forced into slavery. And if he was right, he was the only one who could help her get back to where she belonged. Samuel's hands trembled as he held the small locket. The painted faces inside looked back at him like ghosts from the past. He looked at the girl again, studying every detail of her now clean face. The resemblance to the woman in the portrait was unmistakable. Margaret, he whispered. The girl's eyes went wide. It was the first real reaction he had gotten from her. She tried to speak, but only a small croaking sound came out. It was like she had forgotten how to use her own voice. Samuel reached into his medical bag and pulled out a small bottle of water. "Here, drink this slowly," he said. Holding it to her lips, she drank carefully, never taking her eyes off his face. After a few sips, she tried again. How do you know that name?" Her voice was rough and broken, like someone who hadn't spoken much in years. Samuel felt his heart racing. This was really her, Margaret Elizabeth Ashford, the girl everyone thought was dead, was sitting right in front of him. "I saw the notices," he said gently. 5 years ago, your family was looking for you." Tears started flowing down Margaret's clean cheeks. "My family, are they?" Samuel's heart broke as he realized she didn't know. "I'm sorry, Margaret. Your parents didn't survive the attack, but your Uncle Thomas is still alive in Charleston. He never stopped looking for you." Margaret put her hands over her face and started crying harder than before. But these weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of finally being seen as a real person again. "I thought I would die here," she whispered through her tears. "I thought no one would ever know who I really am." Samuel moved a little closer. "Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up here? Margaret wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I remember the attack. Our carriage was traveling to Savannah. Papa had business there. We were on a lonely road when the bandits came. She paused, the memories clearly painful. They killed Papa, Mama, and our governess missing right away. I tried to run, but one of them hit me in the head with something heavy. When I woke up, everything was different. Different how? I couldn't remember things clearly. My head hurt so badly I could barely think. I was in a wagon with other people, all chained together. The men who had me kept saying I was their property. Now, Samuel listened in horror as Margaret continued her story. They told me my name was Susie now, and that I was born a slave. When I tried to tell them who I really was, they beat me. They said if I kept lying about being white, they would sell me to someone much worse. But surely people could see. Margaret shook her head. They had ways of making me look different. They rubbed dark dyes into my skin. They made me work in the hot sun until I was burned dark. They cut my hair short and made me wear the worst clothes. She looked down at her hands. After a few months, I looked just like all the other workers. And my head injury made it hard to remember details about my old life. Sometimes I wondered if I had imagined it all. Samuel was amazed by what he was hearing. How did you end up on this particular plantation? I was sold 3 times in the first year. Each owner was worse than the last. Then Mr. Whitmore bought me about 2 years ago. Margaret's voice got quieter. But he knew. Dr. Morrison. He knew who I really was. What do you mean? I heard him talking to his friends one night when they were drinking. He was bragging about owning a white slave. He said it made him feel powerful to have a rich man's daughter working in his fields. Samuel felt sick. The idea that someone would knowingly keep a free person in slavery was beyond evil. He has papers that prove he bought me legally, Margaret continued, even if someone suspected the truth. He could show those papers. Who would believe a slave girl over a rich plantation owner? But you have the locket. That's proof. Margaret touched the small chain around her neck. I hid it under layers of mud and dirt. If anyone had found it, they would have taken it away or killed me for having it. It was the only thing I had left of my real life. Samuel stood up and started pacing. His mind was racing with everything he had learned. This wasn't just about helping one person anymore. This was about exposing a terrible crime that had been going on for years. Margaret, I'm going to get you out of here, he said firmly. She looked at him with hope and fear mixed in her eyes. You can't. Mr. Whitmore has too much power here. The sheriff works for him. The judge is his friend. If you try to help me, he'll just say you're trying to steal his property. Not if we can get you back to Charleston. Your uncle can identify you. There are people there who knew you as a child. Margaret shook her head. It's too far, too dangerous. And look at me. Who would believe I was ever a rich man's daughter? Samuel looked at her carefully. Even after cleaning her face, years of hard work and poor treatment had changed her appearance. Her hands were rough now. Her skin was damaged from the sun. Her body was thin from not getting enough food. But there were things that couldn't be changed. The shape of her face, her green eyes, the way she spoke when she forgot to hide her education, the small scar on her chin that he remembered from the missing person notices. There are ways to prove who you are, Samuel said. Scars, birthmarks, things only you would know about your family. Margaret thought for a moment. I have a birthmark on my shoulder. That looks like a star. Mama used to say it was my lucky mark. What else? Papa kept a secret compartment in his desk where he hid important papers. Uncle Thomas would know about it, and I can remember things about our house, about my childhood that only someone who lived there would know. Samuel felt more hopeful. That's good. That's very good. Suddenly, they heard footsteps outside the barn. Margaret immediately hunched down and tried to make herself look smaller, like she had been doing for years. Remember, Samuel whispered. Quickly, if anyone asks, you're sick and I'm treating you. Don't let them know we talked about anything else. The overseer appeared at the barn door, holding a lantern. You still in here, Doc? It's getting late. Just finishing up. Samuel called back. She's got a fever, but nothing that will spread. I'll check on her again in the morning. The overseer grunted and walked away. When they were alone again, Samuel knelt down next to Margaret. "I need you to trust me," he said quietly. "Tomorrow night, when everyone is asleep, I'm going to come back for you. We're going to leave this place together." "Where will we go?" "Charleston. Back to your real life. Back to your family." Margaret looked scared but determined. "What if we get caught?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." "But I won't leave you here, Margaret. Not now that I know who you are." For the first time in 5 years, Margaret smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "I had given up believing that anyone good was left in the world." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "Hold on to that hope. Tomorrow night, your real life begins again." The next morning came too slowly for Samuel. He had barely slept, his mind spinning with plans and worries. How could he get Margaret away from this place safely? And what would happen if they were caught? He spent the morning treating other workers on the plantation, trying to act normal while his heart pounded with nervous energy. Every time he saw the overseer, he wondered if the man suspected anything. Round noon, Samuel made his way back to the barn, carrying his medical bag. He found Margaret in the same corner, but she looked different now. She had managed to wash more of the mud from her hair and clothes using water from a bucket. For the first time, he could really see what she must have looked like before her. "Terrible ordeal. How are you feeling today?" he asked, speaking loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Better, sir," Margaret replied, playing her part perfectly. But when Samuel knelt down to pretend to examine her, she whispered urgently, "There's something else you need to know. Something important." "What is it?" "Mr. Whitmore has papers hidden in his house, papers that prove he knows exactly who I am and where I came from." Samuel's eyes widened. "How do you know this?" "Last month, I was cleaning the main house. I'm not supposed to go into his private office, but the door was open. I saw him looking at papers with my family's name on them. There was even a copy of one of those missing person notices you mentioned. This changed everything. If Samuel could get those papers, they would have proof of Whitmore's terrible crime." "Where does he keep them?" "In a locked box in his desk drawer." "But Dr. Morrison, it's dangerous. If he catches you in there, I have to try. Those papers could be the evidence we need to make sure he pays for what he's done." Margaret grabbed his arm. "Please be careful. He's not just mean, he's evil. I've seen what he does to people who cross him." Samuel spent the rest of the day planning. He watched the house, learning who came and went. He noticed that Whitmore left every Tuesday afternoon to visit a neighbor plantation for cards and drinking. The overseer usually went with him, leaving only a few house servants behind. As evening approached, Samuel's nerves were on edge. Everything had to go perfectly, or both he and Margaret could end up dead. When darkness fell, Samuel made his move. He told the overseer he needed to check on some of the workers one more time before leaving in the morning. Then he quietly made his way to the main house. The back door was unlocked. Just as he had hoped, he slipped inside, moving as quietly as a ghost. The house was mostly dark, with just a few candles burning in the hallway. Whitmore's office was on the first floor, behind the main staircase. Samuel's hand shook as he tried the door handle. Locked. But Samuel had grown up poor, and he had learned a few useful skills in his youth. Using a small knife from his medical bag, he carefully worked at the lock until it clicked open. Inside the office, moonlight streamed through the windows, giving him just enough light to see. Samuel went straight to the large wooden desk and started searching the drawers. The first two drawers held normal business papers, nothing unusual. But the bottom drawer was locked with a small padlock. Samuel used his knife again, working as quietly as possible. When the lock finally opened, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Inside was exactly what Margaret had described, a small wooden box filled with papers. And on top was a yellowed missing person notice with Margaret's picture on it. Samuel's hands trembled as he read through the papers. There were letters between Whitmore and the men who had first captured Margaret. There were bills of sale showing how she had been sold from person to person. And most shocking of all, there was a letter from Whitmore to his brother. bragging about owning a white slave and how much money he could make by selling her to collectors who enjoyed such twisted prizes. Samuel felt sick reading the letters, but he carefully folded them and put them in his medical bag. This was the proof they needed. As he prepared to leave, he heard something that made his blood freeze, the sound of horses outside. Whitmore was coming back early. Samuel quickly closed the desk drawers and locked the office door behind him. He could hear voices getting closer to the house. There was no time to get out the back door. Thinking quickly, Samuel hid in a small closet near the kitchen just as the front door opened. Through a crack in the closet door, he could see Whitmore walking into the hallway. The man was clearly drunk, swaying as he walked. "Check on that girl in the barn," Whitmore told his overseer. "Make sure the doctor didn't do anything stupid." Samuel's heart pounded. If the overseer went to the barn and found Margaret acting strangely, it could ruin everything. But luck was on their side. The overseer was also drunk and lazy. "She'll be fine till morning." "Boss, that doctor seemed harmless enough." Whitmore laughed, a mean sound that made Samuel's skin crawl. "You never know with these do-gooder types. They think they can save the world after what felt like ours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Whitmore and the overseer went upstairs to sleep. Samuel waited another hour to be safe, then crept out of the closet and out of the house. He hurried to the barn, where he found Margaret waiting anxiously. "Thank God you're safe," she whispered. "I was so worried when I heard them come back early." Samuel showed her the papers he had taken. Even in the dim light, Margaret could see her family's name on several of them. "This is it," Samuel said quietly. "This proves everything. But now we have to move fast. If Whitmore discovers these papers are missing, he'll know someone is onto him. What do we do now?" "We leave tonight, right now. I have my horse, and I saw another horse in the stable that looks strong enough for a long journey." Margaret looked terrified but determined. "I've been ready to leave this place for 5 years." Samuel helped her gather the few things she might need: a blanket, some food he had brought from his own supplies. Margaret had nothing of her own except the clothes on her back and the precious locket round her neck. As they prepared to leave, Margaret suddenly grabbed Samuel's arm. "Wait," she said. "There are other people here who don't deserve to be slaves either. People who were kidnapped like me, or born free but forced into this life. Can we help them too?" Samuel's heart ached. He wanted to save everyone, but he knew that trying to help too many people would make their escape impossible. "Right now, we can only save you," he said gently. "But once we get to Charleston and prove who you are, you can help expose this whole operation. That will save more people in the long run." Margaret nodded, understanding but still sad about leaving others behind. They led the horses out of the stable as quietly as possible. Every small sound seemed as loud as thunder in the quiet night. A dog barked in the distance, and they both froze, waiting to see if anyone would come investigate. But the night remained still. Just as they were about to mount their horses and ride away, Samuel heard the worst sound possible: footsteps coming toward the barn. "Someone's coming," he whispered urgently. They quickly hid behind the horses, hoping the darkness would keep them invisible. The overseer appeared at the barn door, holding a lantern. He looked around suspiciously. "I could have sworn I heard something out here," he muttered to himself. Samuel held his breath, knowing that if they were caught now, both he and Margaret would probably be killed. The overseer took a few more steps into the barn, raising his lantern higher. That's when Margaret did something incredibly brave. She stepped out from behind the horses, back into the role she had been playing for 5 years. "Sorry, sir," she said in the broken, scared voice she had learned to use. "I was just trying to find some clean straw to sleep on. I didn't mean to wake nobody." The overseer squinted at her in the lantern light. "You should be sleeping, girl. What are you doing wandering around?" "My stomach's been hurting real bad, sir. I thought maybe some fresh air would help." The overseer grunted. "Well, get back to your corner and stay there, and keep quiet." As he turned to leave, Margaret asked, "Sir, have you seen the doctor? He said he might check on me again tonight." "Doctor's gone, girl. Left this afternoon. Said you'd be fine. Samuel's stomach dropped. If the overseer thought he had already left, what would happen when they discovered he was still here? But Margaret was thinking fast. Oh, that's right, I forgot. My head's still all mixed up from being sick. The overseer left, and Samuel waited until his footsteps faded before coming out of hiding. That was quick thinking. He whispered, I've had 5 years to learn how to lie to stay alive. Margaret replied sadly. Now they knew they had to move even faster. If anyone discovered Samuel was still on the property, there would be questions he couldn't answer. They mounted their horses and rode quietly into the dark night, leaving the plantation behind them. As they reached the main road, Samuel looked back one last time at the place where Margaret had suffered for so long. We're really doing this, Margaret said, and for the first time in years, her voice held real hope. Yes, we are. Samuel replied, You're going home, Margaret. You're finally going home. The horses moved quickly through the dark forest, their hooves making soft sounds on the dirt path. Samuel led the way while Margaret followed close behind. Every shadow looked like danger. Every sound made them jump. They had been riding for about 2 hours when Samuel heard something that made his blood turn cold. The distant sound of dogs barking. They've discovered we're gone, he whispered to Margaret as they stopped their horses. Margaret's face went pale in the moonlight. Those are hunting dogs. Mr. Whitmore uses them to track runaway workers. They'll follow our scent no matter how far we go. Samuel's mind raced. They needed to throw the dogs off their trail. But how? Then he remembered something his grandfather had taught him years ago. Follow me, he said, turning his horse toward a small stream they had crossed earlier. They rode their horses right into the water, letting the animals walk upstream for nearly a mile. The cold water soaked through their boots, but it would wash away their scent and confuse the tracking dogs. Will this really work? Margaret asked, shivering from the cold water. My grandfather was a trapper. He taught me that water is the best way to hide your trail from dogs, Samuel replied, hoping he was right. After what felt like forever, they climbed out of the stream on the far side and continued riding through the night. Behind them, they could still hear the dogs, but the barking seemed to be getting fainter. As the sun started to rise, they found a thick grove of trees where they could rest and hide during the day. Traveling in daylight would be too dangerous. Too many people might see them and ask questions. Samuel helped Margaret down from her horse. She was exhausted and could barely stand. 5 years of hard work and poor food had left her weak, and the long night of riding had pushed her to her limits. Rest now, Samuel said gently, spreading a blanket on the ground. We'll travel again tonight. But just as Margaret was about to lie down, they heard the sound they had been dreading, horses coming fast through the forest, high behind those big rocks. Samuel whispered urgently, Take the horses with you. Margaret grabbed both horses and led them behind a group of large stones. Just as 5 men on horseback burst into the clearing, Samuel recognized Whitmore immediately, along with his overseer and 3 other men he didn't know. I know you're out here, Doctor, Whitmore shouted into the forest. You took something that belongs to me, and I want it back. Samuel stepped out from behind a tree, trying to look calm. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Whitmore. I left your plantation yesterday afternoon, just like I said I would. Whitmore's eyes were full of anger. Don't lie to me. My property is missing, and you were the last person to see her. Where is she? I treated several of your workers for various ailments, Samuel said carefully. If one of them has run away, that's not my responsibility. That girl was worth a lot of money to me, Whitmore snarled. More than you could ever understand. And now I find that important papers are missing from my office too. Funny how both things disappeared the same night. Samuel tried to keep his face calm, but inside his heart was pounding. I'm just a traveling doctor. I don't know anything about your business papers. One of the men with Whitmore rode closer to Samuel. Boss, maybe we should search his bags, see what he's been collecting. This was exactly what Samuel had been afraid of. The stolen papers were in his medical bag, along with other evidence of Margaret's true identity. If they found those documents, it would be over for both of them. That's a fine idea, Whitmore said with a mean smile. Doctor, I'm going to need you to empty your bags. Right now, Samuel knew he had to think fast. Mr. Whitmore, I'm a licensed physician. My medical supplies include dangerous medicines and sharp instruments. If something happens to them because of your search, I'll have to report it to the authorities. In the next town, Whitmore hesitated. He knew that causing trouble for a real doctor could bring unwanted attention from people with more power than him. Besides, Samuel continued, if you really think a runaway worker came this way, shouldn't you be following the trail instead of wasting time with me? It was a risky move, but it worked. Whitmore was more interested in catching Margaret than in dealing with legal problems with a doctor. You're right, Whitmore said finally. But doctor, if I find out you're lying to me, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The 5 men rode away, heading in the wrong direction. Samuel waited until he couldn't hear their horses anymore before calling softly to Margaret. She came out from behind the rocks, leading both horses. Her face was white with fear. That was too close, she whispered. We're not safe yet. Samuel replied, they'll figure out they're going the wrong way soon enough. We need to keep moving. Even in daylight, they mounted their horses again and rode deeper into the forest. Samuel knew these woods from his travels, and he remembered an old cabin where they might be able to hide safely. The cabin had been abandoned for years. The roof leaked and the door hung crooked, but it would keep them out of sight. They led their horses inside and settled down to wait for nightfall. Dr. Morrison. Margaret said quietly, why are you doing this? You could have just left me there and gone on with your life. Why risk everything to help me? Samuel thought about her question. Because it's the right thing to do. You're a free person who was stolen from her real life. No one deserves what happened to you, but you barely know me. For all you know, I could be lying about who I am. Samuel shook his head. I've seen the evidence. The locket, the papers from Whitmore's office. The way you speak when you forget to hide your education. You're exactly who you say you are. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. What if we don't make it to Charleston? What if they catch us? Then at least we tried. At least someone knows the truth about what happened to you. As the day wore on, they took turns sleeping and keeping watch. Every sound outside made them nervous. Once, they heard riders pass close to the cabin, but the men didn't stop to search. When evening came, Samuel checked his map again. We're about halfway to Charleston. If we can travel safely tonight and tomorrow night, we should reach the city by Thursday morning. And then what? Margaret asked. Then we find your Uncle Thomas. He'll be able to identify you. And with the papers we took from Whitmore, we'll have enough evidence to prove what really happened. Margaret touched the locket around her neck. I hope he remembers me. It's been 5 years. I've changed so much. Family doesn't forget. Samuel said confidently, he'll know you. They prepared to leave the cabin as darkness fell. Outside, they could hear owls calling and small animals moving through the underbrush. These were normal forest sounds, much better than the barking of hunting dogs. Just as they were about to mount their horses, Margaret grabbed Samuel's arm. Listen, she whispered. In the distance, they could hear something that made them both freeze with fear, the sound of many horses moving fast through the forest. And this time, the riders were coming straight toward their hiding place. They found our trail. Samuel said grimly, what do we do? Samuel looked around quickly. The cabin only had one door, and the riders would reach it in minutes. But he noticed something else, a small window at the back of the cabin that was just big enough for a person to crawl through. You take your horse and go out that back window, he told Margaret urgently. I'll go out the front and lead them away from you. No, Margaret protested. I won't leave you. You have to. If they catch both of us, no one will ever know the truth about what Whitmore did. But if you can get to Charleston, you can expose everything. The sound of horses was getting closer. They could hear men's voices now, calling to each other as they searched. Margaret, listen to me, Samuel said, grabbing her shoulders. You survived 5 years in that terrible place. You're stronger than you know. You can make it to Charleston on your own. Tears filled Margaret's eyes, but she nodded. She understood. that this might be their only chance. Take this, Samuel said, handing her his medical bag with all the evidence inside. Guard it with your life. It's the proof you need. Margaret hugged him quickly, then led her horse to the back window. It was a tight fit, but she managed to climb through and get her horse outside. Samuel watched her disappear into the dark forest just as the riders reached the front of the cabin. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and walked outside. To face whatever was coming. At least Margaret was free. At least she had a chance to reclaim her real life. That was what mattered most. Margaret rode through the dark forest, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sound of a struggle. Every part of her wanted to go back and help Samuel. But she knew he was right. Getting to Charleston was the only way to save them both. Her horse was tired, but she pushed the animal to keep moving. Samuel had given her directions to the main road that would lead to Charleston. All she had to do was follow it and stay hidden during the day. The first night of traveling alone was the hardest. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow could be a person chasing her. But as the hours passed, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in 5 years: hope. By morning, she had reached the main road. She found a grove of trees where she could rest and hide during the day. As she sat there, holding Samuel's medical bag close to her chest, she thought about what lay ahead. Would Uncle Thomas even recognize her? Would he believe her story? And what had happened to Samuel? The not knowing was almost unbearable. That evening, she continued her journey toward Charleston. The road was busier now, with other travelers, so she had to be more careful. She kept her hood up and tried to look like just another person traveling to the city. On the second night, something wonderful happened. She met an elderly woman named Ruth who was also traveling to Charleston. Ruth had kind eyes and offered to share her fire and food. "You look like you've been through some hard times, child," Ruth said gently. Margaret was careful with her words. "Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to get to Charleston to find my family." Ruth nodded understandingly. "Family is everything. I hope you find them safe and sound." The woman didn't ask too many questions, which Margaret appreciated. They traveled together for the rest of the night, and having company made Margaret feel safer. When they reached the outskirts of Charleston the next morning, Margaret's heart started beating fast. The city looked bigger than she remembered, with more buildings and more people. But some things were exactly the same: the smell of the ocean, the sound of seagulls, the way the morning light hit the church steeples. Ruth wished her good luck and went her own way. Margaret stood at the edge of the city she had once called home, clutching the medical bag and trying to work up the courage to continue. She remembered that Uncle Thomas lived on King Street, in the same house where her father had grown up. It was a big white house with blue shutters and a garden full of roses. At least, that's how she remembered it. Margaret walked through the familiar streets, amazed by how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. Some of the shops were different, and there were new houses and places where empty lots used to be. But the basic layout of the city was just as she remembered. When she finally reached King Street, her hand started shaking. There was the house, exactly as she remembered it. The white paint was a little faded, and the garden looked smaller. But it was definitely the right place. Margaret stood outside the gate for a long time, trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. What if Uncle Thomas wasn't home? What if he had moved away? What if he didn't believe her? Finally, she walked up to the front door and knocked softly. After a few moments, the door opened. A man with gray hair and tired eyes looked out at her. He was older and thinner than she remembered, but it was definitely Uncle Thomas. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. Margaret's throat felt dry. "Uncle Thomas, it's me. It's Margaret." The man stared at her for a long moment, his face showing confusion and disbelief. "I'm sorry," he said gently, "but Margaret died 5 years ago. I don't know who you are, but please don't play cruel games with an old man's heart." Margaret had expected this reaction, but it still hurt. "I know how I must look, Uncle Thomas. I know how impossible this seems, but I'm really her. I'm really Margaret Elizabeth Ashford." Something in her voice made Thomas look at her more carefully. "What did you say your full name was?" "Margaret Elizabeth Ashford. My father was your brother Robert. My mother was Catherine. We lived in the big house on Meeting Street before." Her voice broke as she remembered that terrible day. Thomas's face went pale. "Anyone could know those names from the newspaper reports." Margaret nodded. "You're right. But do you remember the secret compartment in Papa's desk? The one where he kept his important papers? You're the only other person who knew about it." Thomas took a step back, his eyes wide. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Because Papa showed it to me when I was 12. He said someday I might need to know where he kept the family documents." "And do you remember what Mama used to call the birthmark on my shoulder?" The lucky star," Thomas whispered. Margaret pulled back her worn sleeve to show him the star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. It was still there, exactly as he remembered. Thomas stared at the birthmark, then back at her face. Slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes. "Dear God," he breathed, "it really is you? You're alive." He pulled her into his arms, and they both started crying. 5 years of pain and loss and hope and fear all came pouring out at once. "We thought you were dead," Thomas said through his tears. "We searched for months. We never found any trace of you." "I was taken," Margaret said simply, "forced into slavery. I've been trapped for 5 years. Uncle Thomas. But a good man helped me escape." Thomas led her inside the house, still holding her hand like he was afraid she might disappear again. The inside of the house looked just as she remembered. The same furniture, the same paintings on the walls, even the same smell of beeswax and roses. "Tell me everything," Thomas said, settling her in her father's old chair. "Tell me what happened to you." Margaret told him the whole story, the attack on the carriage, waking up with the slavers, the years of forced labor, meeting Samuel, and their dangerous escape. She showed him the papers Samuel had stolen from Whitmore's office. Thomas read through the documents with growing anger and horror. "This Whitmore knew exactly who you were. This is kidnapping, fraud, and worse. We have to help Samuel," Margaret said urgently. "He risked everything to save me. He might be dead because of me." Thomas stood up with determination. "We're going to the authorities right now, and not just the local sheriff. I have friends in the federal government. This is bigger than one plantation, Margaret. This is about justice." Within hours, Thomas had contacted everyone he could think of: federal marshals, newspaper editors, judges, and politicians. Margaret's story spread quickly through Charleston and beyond. 3 days later, they received the news they had been hoping for. Federal marshals had raided the Whitmore plantation. They found evidence of multiple kidnappings and illegal enslavements. Whitmore and his overseer were arrested, along with several other men involved in the operation. And best of all, Samuel was alive. He had been beaten and locked up, but he was safe. Margaret insisted on going to see him in the hospital where he was recovering. When she walked into his room, his face lit up with the biggest smile she had ever seen. "You made it," he said weakly. "We both made it," Margaret replied, squeezing his hand. Over the following weeks, more truth came out. The investigation revealed that dozens of free people had been kidnapped and forced into slavery by Whitmore's operation. Some were rescued and reunited with their families. Others had died in captivity, but at least now their families knew what had happened to them. Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison. The story of Margaret's rescue became famous across the country, helping people understand the true horrors of slavery and the illegal kidnapping of free people. Margaret slowly readjusted to her old life, but she was forever changed by her experiences. She used her voice to speak out against slavery and to help other people who had been kidnapped or illegally enslaved. She also established a school for formerly enslaved people, teaching them to read and write and helping them build new lives. In freedom. Samuel recovered from his injuries and became one of Margaret's closest friends and allies in her work. Together, they helped dozens of people escape from slavery and find their way to freedom. Years later, after the Civil War ended and slavery was finally abolished everywhere in America, Margaret often thought about that night in the barn when Samuel first cleaned the mud from her face. One act of human kindness had changed everything, not just for her, but for all the people they had been able to help. She never forgot the other people she had left behind at the plantation, and she made sure that when freedom finally came, they were not forgotten either. Margaret's story became a reminder that every person matters, that injustice should never be ignored, and that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change the world. She lived the rest of her life as a free woman, but she never forgot the 5 years when she was not free, and she made sure that her experience helped bring freedom to others who were still trapped in the darkness, still waiting for someone to wash away the mud and see them for who they really were.